Address them any way you want, but I'll tell you what we're looking for. And John Hennessy and I, working through David Kennedy, collaborated on these questions, which I sent to you in advance. And for everyone here, basically is identify and prioritize challenges to wellness and healthcare in rural America. We can't take it all on, but we got to take some of it on. Craft a plan of action. How are we going to do that? Identify and focus on existing Stanford resources across all the disciplines and how to collectively work together, sort of prioritize how we're going to do it, and then start to do it, if we're going to do it, because that's a decision you can make, that this is not a high priority, we're going to stay in our silos. Advocate for making Stanford's contribution more effective. How do we amplify that? Who are our partners? What I heard today significantly before we get started is that a lot of people felt that it was the community, however we want to define, that is equally, if not more important, than the university. The university has talent within it, research within it, but you have to find one more, whatever you define the community, to be really engaged in. And according to our good friend from communication, how are we going to communicate? So we got all this stuff, we got all this knowledge, we got all these stories, but how are we going to get them engaged in a fair, transparent, open communication with all the onset of technology? Because I heard all these different messages about technology. As I said early in the day, I heard new things about artificial learning, about machine learning, about deep learning. And then for better or for worse, my world's totally involved now in blockchain. Okay, totally involved. I can't tell you how involved I am in blockchain. And I never even heard the word blockchain until 2 months ago. And my metaphor for blockchain, it came out of the US penal system. I know which cell block I came out of, and I know I'm chained down. So that's what blockchain means to me. So that's the challenge for each one of you. And rather, there's no reason for introductions. These are three great people. One of them I own in Denton, because I would not be a consulting professor if it wasn't for Kari for bringing me back. I was here early in my life as a young assistant clinical professor, and now I'm back with this lofty. And I'll tell you, Kari, just so you know, in Davos, consulting professor had credibility. They didn't even care about me, they just liked the name consulting professor at Stanford. Jay and I go back to a cocktail party a year ago, and really it's communication, and we never reconnected, but we were supposed to reconnect, and how we get communications off. And Lynn's my new best friend, who I know, she went to Fresno. I used to go to Fresno, but I didn't go to Fresno with you, okay? And it's really important that you share your stories, because everyone tells me you're a person who gets the job done. So what I'd like to do is have you try to address what I just asked you in your own way, and then collectively, anyone in the room, feel free, because each one has a contribution. And really it is then to leave my esteemed boss, Bruce, the way to summarize what he's heard all day, take what this edition is, and then go from there. Fair enough? So we have it alphabetically order, or does someone want to go first?
I think we're going to go.
You want to go on the program? Yeah. Lynn, you're first.
All right, I'm well, Mike, thanks. Oh. So I certainly can't tackle all of those very hefty questions, but I thought about what I did have some thoughts about, and listening earlier today to all these talks has been just wonderful. My background is environmental engineering. I can't claim to have grown up in a small town. I grew up in Los Angeles, but that's where I got really interested in air pollutants. So there'll be a little bit of an air pollutant slant to some of my thinking. From my perspective as an environmental engineer, I think about how the environmental challenges we're facing are going to, in turn, impact health in the entire world, but perhaps, unfortunately, disproportionately to rural health. So we've got more and more population. That means we're going to be producing and burning more fossil fuel products, and production in the western US is an especially important issue in terms of pollutants being released. We're also here in the western United States getting some of our pollutants transported all the way from Asia. And as Asia generates more and more pollutants. We're going to get more of those. And then the other issue I'll talk a little more about in a bit is the role of housing on impacting human health. And that isn't something I've heard mentioned yet today, so I'd like to say a few words about it. There's also the global warming issue that was mentioned earlier today, this morning. Certainly more direct stress on human health, heat waves, droughts, dust storms. And it also has impacts on air pollution levels and levels of allergens in the air. I especially am taken by the impacts of climate change because they not only directly impact human health, but their impacts on environmental pollutants are a secondary way they're going to impact human health. So I see it as a double whammy or double impact, that the additional heat waves, dust storms, water shortages, et cetera, are not only going to impact humans directly, but they're going to lead to negative environmental impacts that will also impact humans. Let me say a few words about substandard housing. Why is old, leaky housing a problem? I think that it is worth adding to your considerations today. Well, first, air pollutants can infiltrate from outdoors, and the leakier the home, the more readily those pollutants move into the indoor environment. And there's also the issue that in socioeconomically disadvantaged communities living in these older houses, they're much less likely to have things like air conditioning. So if it's very hot outside, while we might turn on our air conditioners, what they're going to do are open their windows in an effort to try to cool down the house a little bit, and that's just going to let all the outdoor air pollutants in even more readily. There's also the issue of indoor pollution sources. A couple of the speakers today mentioned smoking as having a much higher rate in the rural community. And certainly secondhand exposure to smoke is a very big deal in the indoor environment. But the other thing that comes to my mind when I think about indoor sources in substandard housing is dust resuspension from moving around indoors. And this could be dust off the carpet or off the flooring. It's much more likely in an older housing unit that there will have been leaks or other things happening that are going to greatly increase the level of molds indoors. And then you've got people moving around indoors, resuspending those into the air where children and others can inhale them and be impacted by them. So how can Stanford strategically make a difference? A couple of these I think are obvious, but still worth stating. We have much lower barriers to collaborations between the med school and the rest of the university than what we see in most universities around the country. So that's there for us to take advantage of if we so choose. And I think that this collaborative environment strengthens our ability to look at the big picture, to tackle these very complicated problems that need to be looked at simultaneously in different ways at the same time. And so, in other words, I think the opportunity is there to get out of our silos and to collaborate together on some of these big, messy problems. But the other thing I want to mention that I was already a believer in, but hearing some of people's stories this morning, it just reinforced it in me. I think working out in the field is a really important part of making progress. We're not going to come up with a one-size solution fits all, but being out in the field and interacting with the community is a way of greatly increasing our chances of understanding what's going to work in a particular community. And so I think the fact that we already have experience with field research, both in the medical community and in other parts of Stanford, is something we really might want to consider leveraging as part of our efforts to make a Stanford-specific contribution to advancing this field. And that's all I've got.
or sit down.
Thank you. I actually did have slides, but because Lynn is so eloquent and she touched upon many items that you already know about, I think what's important is to really now think about what can Stanford do, but within the context of the larger world and the larger rural health world and global health. And I think that we've talked a lot with the rural American West, how it's not going to be the same in 5 years. We have so many issues that are developing there in terms of access to health care, in terms of global climate change, in terms of security issues with food and access to be able to educate as well as bring medical care to many people in the rural health environment, as well as to digitalize health. And then to really, as Lynn said, and to echo what Lynn mentioned, is as Stanford moves forward with some of our integration and work in the rural health community, what does the community need? Make sure that we have our finger on the pulse, that we actively engage the community to ask them, who are the stakeholders, who really care about this, and how can we interact with them well. I'll give you one example where we engaged recently in a grand rounds down in the Fresno area. Half of the physicians that came and allied health professionals were from the rural areas around Fresno, from the farming communities. And so they deal a lot with immigrants, they deal a lot with people that are having an ebb and flow of their communities. And so with that, we talked about digitalization of health. Wouldn't it be great to be able to have something in every household to digitalize and get access to the computer and have access to your health care, which is very similar to kind of our mindset at Stanford, right? You have My Health, you're able to open up Epic, get an electronic medical record. But the community doctor said, you know, when we want to ask a patient whether or not they took their asthma inhaler, we don't look at their smartphone to see how many times they touched their smartphone for activating the device. We actually just tell them to bring their wife in or to bring their daughter in, and then we just ask the family member if they were taking their inhaler every day for the last 3 months. So I'd like to just bring it to the fact that when we think about all of the great technology that one can use, to really be able to ask the patients, to be able to ask the community caregivers what makes sense within this structure, or at least now, maybe in the future we'll be able to combine digitalization of health as well as other aspects, but it can't hurt to talk first, get that dialogue going. And I know this seems very commonplace, but I think it really would help to engage the community. We have a number of high school students, for example, that we make sure participate in our rural health studies. We do a lot of work in air pollution, but we want to make sure that we engage the communities first, find out what they need, find out what their questions are, and then focus our research accordingly. So that, I think, is something that when Stanford is thinking about the stakeholders inside Stanford as well as outside Stanford, to really think about that interplay. The other aspect is we're not alone in this. There are many stakeholders that are dealing with rural health. I was just talking to my colleagues in Boston today. You know, they don't deal enough with rural health issues in New England. But then my colleagues in New Hampshire at Dartmouth, that's all they think about is the rural health issues around the Dartmouth, Vermont, and New Hampshire farming communities. And so I think that being able to make sure that we have a touch point with other stakeholders in the community, that our rural health issues in the West, there are similar aspects to looking at the problems that exist between, let's say, the rural West as well as some of the rural health populations in other areas of our country. But I don't want to miss out in the fact that if we focus on what Stanford can do, we really should also be engaging what other people are doing in the rest of the country, making sure that we just don't do this in a fishbowl. I think there are a lot of people that have emphasized how, as we move forward, to interact with each other easily in this new age of internet and collaboration. So I'm hoping that as we think about what Stanford can do, number one, talk to the community, engage first, then develop our research priorities later, to make sure that we metric those research priorities, to make sure that if we are going to do some intervention in the community, that we can metric that and then have feedback from the community. It's a two-way street, and making sure that we continue that conversation. And then lastly, to make sure that we engage in other stakeholders, and that can include other people looking at rural health issues, making sure that we develop socioeconomic studies as well as biological ones and engineering ones and pollution-oriented studies. And then lastly, to make sure that part of that stakeholder group our policymakers. That as we learn, as we develop these conversations, these dialogues, not to forget that we need that link to how to communicate to the government and policymakers at large and the media, and how we're going to bring our message to that, to be able to then again help the communities and help rural health. And I'll leave it at that, those three main items. Thank you.
Jay?
Thank you. So I'll start with a disclaimer. If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if you're a media economist, everything looks like a problem with media markets. So that's the framework that I'm going to focus on. I think of improving healthcare in the rural West in part as a policy problem. So telling healthcare policy stories that currently go untold is a way to ultimately improve the medical outcomes in the region. And here in Silicon Valley, we focus on innovation in your life as a worker, as a consumer, as an audience member, but not really as a voter. So what I think Stanford could do here in this area is to focus on a mission of increasing the flow of high-quality information to the public through journalism about democracy, and in that way improve the health policies that affect the rural West. A quick overview on the supply and demand for public affairs, and then a conclusion about what Stanford could do. So 60 years ago, a Stanford PhD student published his dissertation called An Economic Theory of Democracy. And in that book, he said, everybody in this room has 4 information demands in our lives as a producer, so how do you do your day job better? In our lives as a consumer, what's on sale, what are the prices? In our lives as an audience member, for me that's watching The Crown or Madam Secretary or Designated Survivor or anything about DC. In our lives as voters. In the first 3 markets work pretty well, because if you don't seek out the information, you don't get the benefit. So if I'm going to go to a movie on Friday night, I don't hop in the car and follow somebody randomly. I look at Metacritic, Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb. I get the information because I get the benefit. Think about, though, your life as a voter. Even if you really care about one candidate versus another, and even if learning more about that candidate would help you make a better decision from the perspective of your preferences, the probability that your vote is going to matter in a statistical sense, unless you're Justice Scalia, that's a very tiny number. And so what that means is that the net benefits to becoming informed are negative, because there's always an opportunity cost of the time you're spending when you're trying to become informed. Anthony Downs called that rational ignorance. It's rational from an individual perspective, not to invest in the details of policymaking, but from society's perspective, that means that there are a set of stories that would pass a social cost benefit test, but don't pass a market test, and those important stories go untold. Think about it from the perspective of a newspaper. I just published a book called Democracy's Detectives, The Economics of Investigative Journalism, where I actually do cost-benefit analyses of policy stories. And suppose you do an investigation. It might take you 6 months. That's the average for prize-winning work these days. It could cost you $200,000 in terms of salaries and time. You could change laws, you could change lives, but those benefits spill over onto people who are not your readers and viewers. It's very hard for you to get a return. Each dollar that you spend on reporting could generate several $100s in net policy benefits, but you don't get those, so those stories go unreported. So the demand side is pretty dismal when you're thinking about policy reporting. On the supply side, there are really 5 incentives that generate information. One is pay me, that's the subscription model. One is I want to sell your attention, that's the advertising model. One is I want to change how you think about the world, that's the nonprofit model. I want your vote, that's the partisan model. And I just like to talk, that's the expression model. And if you think about, that applies to social media, it probably also applies to folks who go to become professors.
Or president.
Yes, exactly, that's right. Think about how each of those 5 incentives is biased against supplying information to low-income rural residents in the West. Low income means they have less to spend on subscription. Low income means they're less likely to be targeted by advertisers, so we don't create content to wrap around that advertising. They vote in lower numbers, so they aren't sought out with policy recommendations. Broadband is really expensive in rural areas, so they're less likely to be part of the network effects of the internet, so we're less likely to hear their voices, and they're less likely to be donors to nonprofits, so their issues may not be on the top of the agenda. So what could we do if we wanted to encourage more local and regional stories about rural health care in the West? I think there are 3 things Stanford could do. Number 1, Stanford's just gone through the long-range planning process, and they could make a bet on the area of content generation. I read a subset of the proposals across the university dealing with extending Stanford's influence, and it's very interesting. People at the medical school wrote in proposing a Center on Health Communication that said there's a particular problem in the coverage of medicine, and people in the School of Earth said there's a particular problem in the coverage of science. And actually, what they didn't see is there's a particular problem about the economics of public affairs coverage. So we're in a world where from 2007 to 2014, approximately 40% of reporters were fired in newspapers. So the people who used to cover your research study have now been let go. And what that has done is opened up the ability for and the need for people to tell their own story. So number 1, Stanford could make a bet in the long-range planning process. Number 2, people here could partner with the Stanford Computational Journalism Lab. Computational journalism is a clunky term. It's probably going to be defined by the set of data and algorithms that reporters use. I think of it as stories by, through, and about algorithms. It's essentially trying to lower the cost of discovering stories with better use of data and algorithms and telling stories in a more personalized or engaging way. That's a demand-side approach. We are already doing this. I co-direct the lab in areas like policing. So our students did FOIA requests of all 50 states. We got 130 million records of state police stops, partnered with the engineering school. Several PhD students generated peer-reviewed articles. Cheryl Phillips and Sherrod Gull generated a data set called the Stanford Open Policing Project, which has trained over 100 journalists across the country on how to use that data. It's been used by major media organizations. It's talked about today in the Washington Post. So if you bring data relating to rural health care and you bring some funding, people who want to build tools for journalists could use this as a policy domain to do it in. And then finally, involving more medical students in telling stories related to rural health care. Currently, the Stanford Medical School sponsors something called the Global Health and Media Fellowship. Essentially, it's a national competition that brings a med school student, sometimes from Stanford, sometimes not, here. In the fall, they take classes in our journalism program, and in the winter and spring, they go to a media partner. Right now, that's CNN. And so that student, that med school student, is writing about global health. The same type of fellowship program could be applied to rural health. And Stanford medical students in their 3rd year engage in research. I think for the first time next year, we're going to have a medical student who's actually doing investigative work relating to the opioid crisis. So thinking about research broadly as related to policy journalism would be relevant. So I think if you ask somebody who does research and teaching, what could Stanford do? I think that's sort of what we could do in the communication department.
Well, that's quite a bit to think about. And let me take one shot and then we'll open up to you. So if you're in our position where we've started, and let's say on its rural health, it's been talked about for years, and we had an action-oriented workshop in Santa Fe, New Mexico last May. Now we're in January of the following year. Things have changed, better, worse, whatever else. So if you were in the position of czar on this project, not a team approach, but if you're a czar, Czar Lynn, Czar Curry, Czar Jay, what would you, in your world, think about as core next steps, rather than talking about all this content we've heard and all the issues we've heard? We've heard policy issues, we've heard delivery issues, we've heard the problems in one state and one program and whatever. Where would you take the next step? I mean, would you take the next step? I'll just throw out some ideas. Would you take the next step having a smaller conclave where you take the findings from this and drill down further with a smaller group of people, a work session? Would you open this up to some partnership, collective symposium with the community? However you want to define the community. You bring in the community as partners, because we heard that a lot. The community has to be more involved, and there are different partners. Would you look at trying to synthesize all these comments into some sort of initial, are we an institute, we're a project, are we a center? Do we look at a collaborative center between A and B? So all I'm asking is, where do you think, because I tend to work on a Swiss model. How do we go A, B, C to something that has some texture to it and some deliverables and accountability that we're actually making movement? That's just a personal statement, not a statement from the Bill Lane Center. So Lynn?
Me first, okay.
Well, you're from LA. You're
I knew I
you're
said
not a
wrong
rural
place.
person.
I think that in order to get the level of cross-university participation you might like to have in this very challenging problem, that the first step needs to be to identify a couple very important areas to focus on. I'm a great believer in the low-hanging fruit approach, but it doesn't have to be that. The question that has kept looping back to me today as I've sat here listening to the talks are to think about the barriers to bringing better rural healthcare to the rural population. And certainly there are barriers that are very community specific, but I suspect that there are some that would be more generally applicable. And really, what I've learned from a project I got involved in a while ago with Bangladesh is you don't want to sit in your office and imagine what a place needs. You really need to get out there and figure out what they're going to be receptive to and what approaches are going to work for them. So that's looping back to my thought that once you identify some of these barriers, then you pick specific rural populations that you would like to work with to explore how to overcome these barriers. So that would be my A to B step.
And real quick, because I want everyone else to participate, those low-hanging fruits, anything just off the top of your head that you, from what you heard today, is what you'd say, I would cherry pick that, and maybe pick a grape on that one?
I think the point that was just made about the amount of data potentially available to us to help us gain insights for what are the disparities, what are the challenges and such, that I think you could attract the attention of a lot of different researchers if you had a really juicy database and a set of questions you might like them to consider with the database. So I don't know if that's a low-hanging fruit or not, but it strikes me as one possible way to get quite a range of faculty here at Stanford suddenly very interested in playing with your data set and in seeing if they can figure out some of the questions you're asking.
Carrie?
Yeah, I think, and to build on what you said, I'm not very good at being a czar, I have to say that. But if we were to think about this, I would start small before going big. I would bring in the community, I would bring in media, and then I would bring in policymakers all in a room to be able to have a discussion. And it could be that you'd have this triangulation around one major health problem that they all are passionate about. And then we think at Stanford, they all raise issues, but then we think about how we're going to address those key issues, bring in the key people at Stanford that could do that, and then next have a larger group where you involve the Stanford people around that. And then have a metric, have an accountability, have a system where you're going to develop timelines and milestones to have a project that you all feel good about, have a plan, and then act on that plan, and then come back and talk to this community larger about, okay, look at what we did, look at how well we did it, and then that will hopefully have a ripple effect. But I'd say start small, start with a project that everyone's engaged in, bring the community, bring the media, bring policymakers involved in that from the get-go as to what project would be best, and then involves the Stanford researchers, do it well, have it focused on the rural health of the West, and then we can then show, hopefully, how well we did, and then move forward.
One note of clarification. Where you convene these three sources, you said media, policy, and community, whoever, right? Is that meeting held out in the community before you bring them here? Or do you bring them here for discussion? I'm just trying to get the logistics of your thought process.
I would say but I'd be interested in the audience, I'd be interested in what Bruce has to say, but I'd say go to the community so
Okay.
that we can show our efforts.
Okay. So where we might have been already, or we might be a new area.
Right.
It could be either or. Okay. Jay?
So people asked President Hennessy how he was able to herd cats, which is how you describe academics, and he said excellent cat food. And I think
Excellent what?
Excellent cat food.
Oh.
Yeah, so
Which is either money or data.
yeah, that's right, that's what it is. It's either money or data. And I think that we've seen that in the cyber initiative as a model, or the Catalyst program right now that the engineering school is running, a competition where the prize is $3 million. So I think what that does is it focuses people's minds, and it allows people to say, I have a problem I'm interested in, which for me is having to use the digital exhaust and public data at the local level to discover local public affairs stories. That's the thing that I'm focused on. But if somebody had money and said we will support experiments that relate to the use of data and algorithms and policy, I could make rural health the thing that I focused on. So
You only get one kind of cat food.
yeah. Well, no, as an economist, self-interest is beautiful, right? But I'm serious about that. If you can get funding and data and 3 people, I think that's another thing President Hennessy used to say, right? If you have 3 researchers whose day jobs will be better because of their involvement, you don't want somebody to do it out of a sense of necessarily obligation. You want them to say, I'm really, really fired up about this particular research question, and I can explore it through the lens of rural healthcare. That to me would be helpful.
Great. Well, let's turn it open, and feel free not to ask a question, but to express yourself on what you would see as next steps, or direct a question. You have your druthers one way or the other. And when I filmed President Hennessy just before this panel. And I met him recently as a chauffeur. So when the Bill Lane Center had a walk to the ocean, John had to stop, and they asked me to do all this thing as a pro bono consultant to drive him home. So I drove John Hennessy home, and I asked him 3 questions. I'll just tell you apropos of this. I said, what are the 3 biggest issues that you have at Stanford? Online educations, how do we keep humanity still lofted here? The 3rd one I forget, and I said, what about the 4th one? What do you think about the medical issue? He said, can we move on to another subject? I'd rather talk about the football coach than the complexity of the medical school. So he was right. So today I said, so where do we go forward? And he says, you're on to something. You're going to have some challenges within the Stanford community, but I would suggest that you have a 3 to 5 person leadership committee put together right now, okay? And then you define what you want to do, but get some cross-pollination right now so they feel ownership of the issue of rural health. And you have that in engineering, and he might be in this room, okay? But he said, get on with it, and then he amplified what you said, and what Bruce concurred to. It is about money, it is about data. And he says, Stanford is moving out into the community, but that's not how we're perceived as the leader. So you're breaking new ground, and I applaud you for that, so let's get on with it, okay? And he says, I'm here. He didn't say I'm gone. And he says also there's a change, and I've heard that several times now, there's a change of leadership. And every time you go from one administration to the next, things do change. I'm not saying better or worse, but there are changes and style changes, okay? So let me open it to anyone here who has a question or a thought about if you were the czar that these people just had. They all had their czar statement, or czaress, okay? Not just czar, they're, they're feminine.
2 minutes of Tsarism.
I'm Justin
Yeah.
Trudeau, I'm a feminist now. So how do you go in your thoughts on what you would do from where we're at, where we went with the movie, where we're at today? What do we leave to Bruce to orchestrate in his comments? And how do we take the next stage? Sure.
Well, I have a comment and would love to open it up for reflection, and it ties to Dr. Hennessy's comment about online education, also then Gallagher's comment about the need for healthcare education. And we think of research universities having that dual role of research and education. And a lot of what we've heard today is about the possibilities for data and the use of data to either elucidate, bring light to conditions, or to possibly provide solutions downstream. And it seems that also there's a huge opportunity to think about how we might extend the borders of Stanford as an educational institution and become involved in healthcare education through these online sources and possibly other ways, and what it would mean for something like the center or the evolution of this program to think about how the various departments could come together around a dual mission of education and research.
Okay, thank you. David.
So I'm going to make a self-interested suggestion. Of course, that's what we all do, right? But first just say, more broadly, I really like the community, go out and talk to the community concept. And I think in Fresno, you have a really strong base with the great work the medical school's been doing there in particular. And while Fresno is a city, it is, the rural West is very tied into these cities like Fresno too. I mean, and it is a sort of a magnet for the farm communities around it. And it's exciting to hear about Greg Criddle, getting excited to work with Mary and you, Carrie, and that's just great stuff. So now here's my self-interested thing. I was impressed. I think that the connection between rural health and climate change is really important for a lot of reasons. I'm really into climate change, and people don't talk about climate change right now in a health context. And I was impressed today about how that health context came out with the discussion of the temperature shock effect on, for example, the pollutants and energizing the pollutants and making the already bad air quality in the Central Valley even worse. Marshall Burke has done work on the fact that the high temperatures also decreases human productivity. That's another really important angle for outdoor agricultural workers in the Central Valley. I think I remember being in this room last year, I think his work is in India, but it's here too. And places that don't have air conditioning, and folks don't think about climate change as having these very serious impacts right now on productivity. And if there would be a way to amass some big data around these issues and apply them in a focused rural / city / rural area like the Central Valley in California, for God's sakes, I think it would be powerful. And my secret mission is not only to, in fact, help identify a serious health problem, but also raise awareness about climate change actually impacting us, not just if you live on the coast and watch the sea rise, infinitesimally, every year, but in fact, in your daily life.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts?
Hi. As you heard earlier, I now work in the School of Medicine, but what most people in the room probably don't know, but people like Alan might, is I've actually worked at all of our 7 schools at some point or another in the last decade of my life. And prior to that, I spent 20 years in technology. If we want to create the change that we're talking about here, I think I like the idea of get cat. Somebody used the word of, I think Hennessy said, if you want to hurt cats, get cat food. But I think in addition to that, perhaps the idea of an incubator that says we will fund projects as long as they're addressing a specific issue as it relates to rural health, includes implementation science, so it's evidence-based or research-based data to actually drive the change, with milestones and deliverables over a 12 or 18-month period in order to actually show results. Far too often we give out funding and people go off and go and do their own research, but we don't necessarily see that collaborative work, nor do we see the implementation science in terms of actually impacting and creating the change that we believe in. So I'd like to suggest perhaps a rural health incubator with certain criteria around implementation science, a community partner, so you can actually hear what are the needs of that partner before you start solving their problems, etc.
Thank you, that was a great idea. What about the middle table? I'm picking on the middle table, because 2 of my sweethearts are at the middle table. Sorry to express my feelings, but they're there. So Hope, from your perspective, I mean, as a person, I'm not using the last name or your other partner's last name. I'm just using Hope, because that's what we need, hope.
I sat through, I think I missed one of the Rural West conferences, and as time has gone by, we've tried to focus it down into healthcare and to health, which I think was really important. But as I was listening today about what some of the needs are, it starts to circle out, it starts to grow again. So for instance, I think telemedicine has an enormous opportunity for solving changing this distance problem, which is an enormous problem on people's health, on their productivity, on their ability to get better. But in order to have that, we've got to have access. We've got to have internet into these places. If we can get internet into these places, then it comes back to entrepreneurial economic development. Suddenly we can help create these places where they can retain their way of life because they've got jobs to offer to their kids, which then comes back to meaning that the rural area isn't an aging population with all of its attendant health problems. So I'm struggling a little bit with how we keep this into something that's manageable and some small bites where we can have success, and yet in order to be successful in those, we still have to be attaching in some other areas. That's sort of one broad thought. The other thing that I like, that I hear coming out a lot of, was the importance, and I think you mentioned it as well, which is, and I think it's one of the hallmarks of the West, of the rural West, it's one of the good things, which is using the community, using the family, using the friends, using those human connections to help get better, which requires us to go into those communities, and it becomes a community trickle-up theory. And I guess that's why I come to these, because I think of all these things, and then I'm hoping somebody smarter will figure out how we can do them.
No, I don't think it's smart, I think collectively.
So I would say everything. The thread, I went back through some of my notes from the rest of today, and something that is written substantially is residencies. And how do we go into the community as a residency program? And does the Rural West need more allied professionals and then a linkage through technology through to more specialty care? Or do we need an open connection of residency programs that might help link a really good physician who really wants to stay in a rural setting? I did talk to Ben a little bit about, really that more education and how could an institution like Stanford University create area health centers that are training, sort of train the trainer opportunities that then, if they so choose to come here and finish their education, they could, but then they were doing the research and the research was being fed back into those successes that Stanford is seeing in other areas is really kind of what has been thread into my notes.
From the last table, since we got every table represented, except over here by the camera, but sure, please, Alan.
Let me just start by telling you a really quick story, which is what happened when I announced in Humboldt that I was moving to Stanford. And basically, it was, what a sellout you are, is what I heard. The only thing that worked was that I was getting to be close to my grandchildren. People trusted that. Everything else about it was, how dare you? And a story that I didn't tell at my panel had to do with how we dealt with getting access for specialty care in the safety net in a rural area where there was already a shortage of specialists in general. And the safety net was having a really hard time getting the specialists to see the Medi-Cal patients, largely because the visit rate was $22 a visit, which was less than half of what it costs to produce a visit or pay for a visit from the practice level, not in terms of profit, but just covering expenses. So what we came up with was a telemedicine center that invited the community specialists in, paid them $500 a half day, and they saw people both in person and by telemedicine. And we served all of Northern California, including very rural places, much more rural than Humboldt, than the Northeast of California. And we were not a spoke to Stanford's hub. We were the hub, right? Nevertheless, there are things that Stanford offers that we didn't have. And generally, what makes Stanford welcome in a rural community, and I've been on both sides of this now because part of my job is spreading what I've learned at Stanford and what we learned in Humboldt. So I've traveled around and worked with health systems and clinics all over the U.S. And there is not, I had much better credibility in my travels before coming to Stanford than I've had since. And now there is a huge amount of resentment at the local level at perceived arrogance from the institution. So my advice is humility, humility, humility. Go in and listen. And then there are things that, getting the specialists to deal with our overutilization of certain procedures. We couldn't have done that locally. We needed Stanford for that. When we have people who need bone marrow transplants, we need Stanford. Heart transplant, we need Stanford. But it has to do with kind of the positioning of an institution like this compared to what people are actually looking for. And I think it can be done, but it has to be done really consciously. I've been successful, but I start out apologizing everywhere I go. We don't know what you need to do. You have to tell us what you think you need to do, and maybe we can help. Is sort of a much better approach than the one traditionally taken, I think. So let me stop there.
No, thank you for your pearls, but could you go, given that you do have this unique position of being in the community, actually being from New York, right? Migrating through San Francisco, up to Humboldt, then to Palo Alto, and now you're in limbo, driving up and down 101.
Well, they fly me. They fly me. It's good. I don't have to drive.
Okay. So let's put your hat on Stanford, and you've seen what this initiative, and that new idea about the rural incubator is a great idea in my head.
Yeah, I love it.
I thought that was a fantastic idea, because it would fit the culture here, I think, But help us, from your thoughts, now you are the czar from New York coming out here. What would you do with the next steps of what you heard today? Keep in mind, we're in Yakima shortly, March, right? We have a message to put forth there. We have some emissaries in our good friend Lynn and others. So we have to bring Stanford into this picture, but understand the humility, the humbleness, the thoughtfulness of going out there, and Kerry's definitely seen that. So
It's a really relevant question, and I work at CERT now, so we are in possession of a lot of very exciting new models of care. And the question
can you
is
spell
how-
out the acronym?
The Clinical Excellence Research Center,
Okay.
which is the research center Arnie Milstein started, that I'm now faculty for. I work half-time there. We have to bring the money. We can't expect the rural communities to generate the money, they don't have it. And then we have to customize our brilliance to the local setting. One of the things I learned very early in my career as a medical director came from a study where it was at Geisinger Health in Pennsylvania, and they showed their medical community 5 different sets of guidelines around some condition. The condition is irrelevant. And one of them was the locally generated guideline. And another one was the one from the big health plan. And you could substitute the big university or whatever, something outside of a community. And they were word for word the same. It was a study. And they ranked the local one number 1 of 5, and they ranked the one from the health plan 5 of 5, the worst. And there was not a single word different in the two, right? And I think it was like Aetna did this, or Cigna, I can't remember which insurance company. That's the lesson, is local ownership, and it's exactly what we heard before. So that's a challenge for people so intensely branded as we are here, to give up that and let it be local. And residency idea, we'd love a Stanford residency. We're already getting medical students. I said before, they love coming here. UC Davis is the one reaching out to us to open a family practice residency in Humboldt, which will open in about 2 years. Not Stanford. So which made me sad, because here I am at Stanford, love to help Humboldt, but we haven't done that so far. And so we don't want to be studied we want a chance to talk about our needs and how Stanford could help fulfill them. But it has to be done in a way that allows us, as rural people, to retain our dignity and sense of self-determination. And it's a challenge. It's not that Stanford's ill-intended. It's really well-intended. But it's just about seeing how it looks from the rural perspective, and it's a very different view than we have here.
I totally respect you. Does anyone else have a thought? So we can give, before we get to our closing session, we're going to give Bruce 5 minutes to get all his thoughts together. So we'll take a stand up. What?
I'm all set.
Oh, he's on.
You're all set? Boy, oh boy. He doesn't need any time to have some deep learning or some whatever else. Anyone else have a comment they'd like to put forth? Anyone from this table over here? Did we get all the comments? What about any of the staff we should applaud too for all the hard work they did? Whether it was John, Betty, or Bruce. I mean, this has been a collective effort, and we really have got a lot of pearls. They came in here. It wasn't on a totally definitional situation. So we're on the trip to go forward. Thank you so very much. We're synthesizing, just so you know, we're going to synthesize this into an article, and hopefully we get your voices included in this. And we're also synthesizing it into a video that you'll all see that'll tell the story that we heard, extract the pearls, and move it forward, and then look to how best to bring people together in Yakima. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce, on anything I'm saying, because you're my boss. Bruce won't tell you, he's from New England and I'm from New York. So a New Yorker always respectful of a person from Boston. So that's where we're at. So